Hey guys, how's it going? Jay here once again with another video. And in today's video, I'm going to show you guys the process of setting up a virtual machine in VirtualBox on Windows for the purposes of running Linux. Now, I'm going to be using Ubuntu as the example distribution, but it really doesn't matter which distribution you decide to go along with. I wanted to basically have a video to refer people back to when I get the question, how do I set up a Linux VM in VirtualBox on Windows? And this is that video. Now, I'm going to be using this laptop right here, the System 76 Lemur. It's not the current model. This is a tried and true laptop for me. I've done a ton of tutorials using this laptop as the recording source. And this is actually the final video that will be recorded with this laptop. An individual by the name of Ron B has purchased this laptop on eBay, so I'll be shipping it over to him as soon as I am done recording this video. So I just thought I'd mention, this has been a great machine, and I'm sad to see it go, but I think it's in good hands. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started on the process of setting up VirtualBox for running a Linux VM. All right, so here we are on a Windows 10 install. This is actually the same exact installation I used for the Linux Mint Windows dual boot video that I've done in, I think it was last week or the week before that. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to go ahead and open a web browser. Doesn't really matter which one. We need to download a few things. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go to ubuntu.com first and foremost. I'll download the thing that is the biggest first. And I'm going to go ahead and download Ubuntu Desktop, but you can also download the server version as well. It really doesn't matter. Again, it doesn't even have to be Ubuntu. Whatever you want to install is fine. So I'll go ahead and click on that right here. Download should start automatically, and there it is. So I'm going to go ahead and let that finish. So next, we're going to go to virtualbox.org. I'm going to get VirtualBox installed. So there's actually a couple of things we will want to download here. So what I'm going to do is download the latest version of VirtualBox for Windows. And of course, if you are on a different platform, feel free to download something else if you'd like. It should be an executable file, as you see here, so I'll simply save that file. Then we also need to download the extension pack. Well, actually, we don't need to download this. It's just a recommended thing to download. I'll explain that in just a moment. So there's three things that we want to download for the purposes of what we're doing today. And I'm just waiting for Ubuntu to finish downloading, which it looks like it's going to be less than a minute. So I will be right back. All right, I think we should be all done now. And we are. Everything is downloaded. So I can just simply click this folder icon, any one of these, to go to the downloads directory. And of course, I do have a couple other files here, but we'll ignore those and focus on the three that we downloaded today. So the first thing is going to be to install VirtualBox. So I will do that right now. And we're going to go through this little wizard. At least I think that's what Windows people are still calling this. And I'm leaving everything as the default for most of this here. And you can basically have a shortcut in your quick launch bar, which probably means taskbar nowadays. Probably should change the verbiage there. You could choose which of these you want, basically just a start menu entry, a shortcut on your desktop, something like that. So next. And right now we're getting a little warning that's telling us that it's going to restart the network stack. So if you were in the middle of downloading something, this could interrupt that. Doesn't really matter to me because I have nothing else going on, so we'll ignore the warning. And then we'll go ahead and click install. Click install here as well. And then finish. So we should have everything that we need, and it went ahead and opened up VirtualBox for us. But before we get into setting up our chosen Linux distribution, there's a few things we should configure first. So I'll go here to File and Preferences. And the default virtual machine folder defaults to this right here. You can change that if you want to. You don't have to. Just keep in mind if you want to change the folder where VMs are basically storing their disk files, you might want to fix that, especially if you want to redirect those to a different hard drive or something like that. Now let's go down here to extensions, and what we can do is add this optional extension pack that we've downloaded, which will help you do things like share a USB connection, for example. This is technically proprietary software, which is why it's separate. It's up to you if you want to include this. I personally don't see any reason not to, because it does give you additional functionality, so I do recommend it. So just make sure that it's selected. We'll click Open, Install, and then we'll agree to this. Lots of questions in this process here. And that was installed. Now, something to keep in mind though is if you create a VM and you have this installed, then it's pretty much going to become a requirement to have this installed. But you know, that's probably fine. I'll click OK. So anyway, we should be all set and ready to go. So I'll click New to create a new VM. I'll just call it Ubuntu because I'm not feeling very clever today in the naming. And it kind of looks at the name, and if it has a certain keyword that matches a distribution, it's going to select that here. So for example, if I just chose CentOS, it changed it to Red Hat, even though I didn't type Red Hat. It tries to match the closest option here to what you are typing. But for us, we want to go ahead and choose the name that actually matches the type of VM we are wanting to create. Again, Ubuntu in my case, and it automatically switched it to that right here. You do want to make sure that this matches the distribution that you are trying to install. Within reason, if you are trying to install Linux Mint, you won't see that in the list here. Ubuntu is fine because, you know, it's basically based on that. So I'll click Next. Now, what I'm going to do is give it about 3 gigs. I think that's 3072. What you want to do, generally speaking, is I just open up a file manager to cheat a little bit, go to this PC. I just right-clicked on that, just go to Properties. I know there's like an easier way to get there, but anyway, you can see that this laptop has 8 gigs of RAM, so I should be fine to give it 3. Just make sure you're not over allocating the memory for your VM. Ubuntu desktop, 3 gigs is probably fine for that. The server version, you could probably get away with about 1. I think 2 nowadays is probably the norm. I'll leave that up to you, depends on your hardware. Anyway, so I'll leave that here at 3 gigs or so. And now we get an option to create a virtual hard disk. So I'll click Create. I'm going to leave the default here for the type of disk, because that's usually what works best in this situation, at least as far as I've tested. Dynamically allocated is fine, it's up to you. A fixed size is going to create a disk file that is the size you want the hard drive to be, the virtual hard drive. Dynamically allocated means it's going to grow as you continue to add things and expand inside the Linux VM. I like that better, but I'll leave that up to you. I don't really have a preference. Just make sure you're not over allocating that. And they recommend a default of 10 gigs. I'll just say 20. I think 16 is probably a safer minimum than 10. 32 probably better. But again, I'll leave that up to you. It depends on how big your host hard drive actually is. I'll click Create. And we could actually go ahead and start the VM right now, but I'm not going to do that. Instead, since it's highlighted, I'll go to Settings. And let's change a few things here. Some things that I think are good to change anyway. Under System, we already set the RAM earlier. I like to give the VM more cores to work with. I think 2 is fine. If you are running a bunch of VMs, you may want to adjust this accordingly. You can set an execution cap if you don't want it to use all of the CPU or all of that core. I'm going to leave that at 100%. I think that's fine. Display, if it is an Ubuntu or basically a distribution that has a GUI, I do recommend selecting this, and I'm going to. If this was Ubuntu server, for example, you wouldn't even have to do this. You could probably just leave that alone. In fact, you should. Then you could choose how much video memory you like to give it. I like to kind of crank that up basically to the maximum. If your maximum is much higher than 128 on yours, 128 is probably fine. Just gives it some video memory to work with. Again, this is only for the desktop versions of distributions out there, not necessary if you are not installing a GUI. For storage, we have our virtual disk right here. We also have a place to attach a virtual CD, and you could probably guess what I'm about to do, and you are right. Click this icon right here to choose a disk file. And then in the downloads directory, we have Ubuntu right here that I can go ahead and open. It's basically the same thing as putting a DVD in the DVD drive of a physical computer, essentially. And the other thing I like to do is click here where it says network. This is optional. I like to change this to bridged adapter. And the reason I like to do this is because I want the VM to get an IP address from my actual router on my LAN. You can still connect to the VM and work with it with NAT. It's totally fine. I just like to do it this way. But you want to make sure that you are attaching it to an adapter that's, basically relevant for your use case. Here, I have it attached to the Wi-Fi card. I am connected via Wi-Fi, so that works for me. If you had a wired connection, you would want to choose that here. Just keep in mind, if you disconnect from your wireless and you have it set to wireless, then you'll need to manually go in here and change that. So it's up to you if you want to use NAT or not. I always use bridged adapter, so I'll leave that up to you. I'll click OK. We'll get back to the video shortly, but I wanted to take a moment to mention my sponsor, Linode. Linode has been my infrastructure provider for well over a year now and has just recently announced their own managed Kubernetes service. Now you can combine Linode's ease of use and simple pricing with the infrastructure efficiency of Kubernetes. With the Linode Kubernetes engine, you can get your infrastructure and workloads up and running in minutes instead of days, and scale resources in real time to meet your infrastructure needs. With Linode's managed Kubernetes engine, pricing is simple. Only pay for what you use. And with Linode's 99.9% uptime SLA and bundled transfer, you can significantly cut costs when compared to AWS, GCP, and Azure. Designed with the open source ecosystem of Kubernetes, the Linode Kubernetes engine supports integration with tools like Helm, operators, and more. To help you get started with Kubernetes, Linode gives you access to in-depth documentation, video tutorials, and webinars. Go ahead and sign up at linode.com/learnlinuxtv to get a $60 60-day credit to test out LKE or any other of Linode's products. I really appreciate Linode's continued support of Learn Linux TV, so go ahead and check them out. You won't regret it. Now, let's get back to the video. We should be good to go. I'm going to click Start. And it's asking us which disk to boot from, even though I attached a disk to it already. I don't know why it does this, but I'll click Start. I'll ignore the warning here. Notice how it says Write Control. That is your host key if you need to break out of the VM for any reason. But essentially, I'm just letting this run. And it's just basically telling me it supports mouse pointer integration, which is pretty cool. And this icon here will silence that warning so it'll stop coming up after you've read it the first time. So it's just basically checking the ISO file. Probably a good idea to let this finish. And then we'll make sure that our download wasn't corrupted or anything like that. And it wasn't. And here we have the installation screen, so we can go ahead and get this installed. And I'm going to go through this a little bit quickly because there's nothing specific to this installation pertaining to VirtualBox. It's the standard Ubuntu installer that we all know and love. So I'll click Continue here for the keyboard layout. I'm just going to accept the defaults. Now I'm not going to leave this box checked because for me it's just going to add additional time to the recording, but it might be a good idea for you if you want to go ahead and get those updates installed. I'll click Continue. And I'm going to go ahead and erase the disk. There isn't actually anything on it anyway. Continue. And I'm choosing my location here. I'm going to get it close to Detroit. There it is. And I'll fill out the user info here. And we should be good to go. I'm going to go ahead and let this install, and then I'll be back as soon as it's finished. All right, so the installation is complete. I'm going to go ahead and restart. All right, so far so good. We have Ubuntu starting up. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and log in with the password that I chose during the installation. I'm going to go ahead and skip all of this right here. And we have a little bit of a problem though, because the window is really small. So if I go ahead and enlarge it, let's see if it's going to expand the actual resolution to match the window size, which it's not going to do by default. So that's one of the things that we want to go ahead and fix. So I'm going to open up a terminal here. There's a few packages that we can go ahead and install. So first I'm going to run sudo apt update. Make sure the package repository is fully indexed properly. And now there are a few packages that we can install, again specific to Ubuntu, but I'm going to run sudo apt install VirtualBox guest dkms and then VirtualBox guest x11, enter. Enter again. All right, so we have those packages installed. Another thing I like to do is just go ahead and install all of the updates. So I will run this sudo apt dist-upgrade, just like that. And enter. And then I'll go ahead and let these download and I'll be right back. All right, so that's all set. And another thing I like to do is go up here to devices, then shared clipboard, and I'm going to make that bidirectional. Just going to make that a lot easier for copying and pasting between the host and the guest VM. And now what I'm going to do is go ahead and shut this down. Power off and then power off again. I'm going to bring up the VirtualBox console again right here. And now that we have everything up to date and configured, what I like to do is go here and then go to snapshots and just take a snapshot of the base installation all set and ready to go. So I'll click take, and you could call yours whatever you like. I like to just call mine initial install. Doesn't really matter. So now we have a restore point, basically, if we make a mistake and we need to go back to a vanilla setup there. So I'll go ahead and start the VM just to make sure that it's working properly. All right, so far so good. I'll go ahead and log in. All right, so let's make the window bigger and see what happens. There's going to be a little bit of lag here while it adjusts itself, but that should be fine. And you can see how the actual resolution of the display inside the VM window is actually growing to match the size of the actual window in, well, Windows. And what we could also do is go to View and then Full Screen Mode. And it's just telling us we can use the right control to break out of full screen. No problem there. And of course, there's a little bit of a delay while it switches, but that is fine. And now we have a full screen Ubuntu VM. And the performance should actually be decent. You will lose a little bit of performance inside a VM. That's just the way it goes. But the performance is better than it would be if we didn't install those packages that we installed earlier in the video, but we should be good to go. And to break out of full screen mode, we can press the right control key, which is the default host key. We hold that down and then press F for full screen. That's going to make it smaller. And then of course we can go ahead and adjust the screen. So I'll just make it a little bit smaller here, but you get the idea. It's going to go ahead and adjust the resolution to match, and that is the benefit of those packages that we installed earlier. So there you go. That was my tutorial for setting up a Linux distribution inside a VirtualBox VM on a Windows host. I hope that was helpful for you guys. Now definitely subscribe to my channel if you haven't already done so. I have some awesome content coming, including a tutorial series on Ansible, which you guys have been asking about for a long time. I'm really excited for this one. So subscribe to my channel and you'll be the first to see a notice of that becoming available as soon as I have them edited. So there you go. I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.